everybody. Welcome to Writers Drinking Whiskey. I'm your host and humble barkeep here, William R. Hincy, and we have a very special show today. I'm going to call The Three Lives of Richard Hawley. And true to the name, we have with us author Richard Hawley. Richard, welcome to the Whiskey Bar. I'm honored to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and so I'll give you the introduction, and feel free jump in and add whatever I might have missed. But I think writing wise, you're probably most well known for the Headmaster's papers. But your recent books include you have The Three Lives of Jonathan Force, which is where I borrowed heavily the name for our little show today from. We have Grieve's Passing. I Can Learn from You with Michael. I didn't pronounce. Was it Reichert?
Reichert.
Okay. Yeah, with Michael Reichert. And then you have the On My Way Out, a meditation on closure, which is there's 3 books, or there's 4 books already done. There's a 5th you're working on now.
Right. A 5th is if the publisher is getting ready for publication.
Okay, the 5th is ready for publication. You're working on 6 now. And then we have those. And then as far as non-writing credits go, you were the headmaster at Cleveland's University School until you retired. And you're the funding president for the International Boys School Coalition. And then what I was very fascinated by when we talked before show is that you're also a saloon piano player, which is maybe the highest of all of these credentials.
Yeah, well, I'm waiting for my big break, but yes, I love it.
Very good. Was there anything else you'd like to mention to the list I just added, or?
I think that's a good summary of at least my writing life. I also central in my life is I have a family. I have a wife and 3 daughters, 3 grown daughters, and they are all teachers. They're all educators, and they have families. So I think being embedded in family is one of the great themes of my life.
Oh, very good. Very good. Good to hear it. I would agree with you. I'm always swirling, or sometimes at the show, there's like family like right behind me here and things going on. And so yeah, it's a good way to ground you. A good way just to be happy, I think, in general. So, and I know and I've done with 1 page of the agenda, so we'll toss that. I'm doing a David Letterman thing now where he threw pencils. I'm just going to throw paper willy-nilly around that I have to pick up because there's no cleaning staff. I know from talking to you, though, prior, that this is, approximately 4:30 your time on a Thursday. So this is usually bourbon and talking writing time, and I just get to be the one doing it with you today. So we're probably a little bit behind on the bourbon. So my favorite question to ask is, what are we drinking?
Well, what I'm drinking is a Crown Royal whiskey, Canadian whiskey, and with kind of a shortcut old-fashioned additions. I did a little splash of orange bitters and a little splash of grenadine syrup. That's skipping some of the traditional steps, but it adds that little bit of sweetness to the bourbon, and that's what I'm drinking. I can prove it.
Thank you for that. And then I'm going to be drinking. So this is kind of, and if I can show it here, it's always hard for me because I'm so small on the screen to tell if I'm showing it adequately or not. But this is a little distillery that opened up in downtown Los Angeles. There's all the different districts, these cities have. That was the arts district called Lost Spirits. And they do a fun little tour. It's all like people from like MIT and the CIT, these schools, they get together and they decided they're going to make whiskey, but aging it with high powered lights versus the traditional oak barrels. And they do a little thing. It's very whimsical. Do we have them? They actually give you little tickets when you go there to like come back. They're like your golden ticket, like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So it's a really fun tour there, the kind of a unique way. So I'm going to just be having, and they can't call it bourbon or whiskey so they just call it heavily peated malts because it's not aged in oak barrels. So they can't legally actually call it. So I'm just going to have a little bit on that in the ice. And my secret is I always have like a backup drink. So I also have an old fashioned here that my 2-fister here to get through the show.
But the original beverage is called Abomination.
That's what they call this one. So they call this one Abomination. They all have different names. These bottles here, actually, this one, what do they call it? Distillery. I can't even remember. It's something like Jamaica, but there's an extra I here. And then they have Navy style rum. Carousel is this one. These were all three. When we were there, actually, you're only allowed to buy 2 bottles a person. But I was there with my wife, so we got the whole all 4. And they might have more now. That was a few years back. But fun place. Anyone's ever out in Los Angeles area, you want a unique experience and a little bit of a boozy unique experience. Check it out. It's Lost Spirits. I'll put a little link on. They're not paying me. They probably maybe should after this, but it's a fun place, and if you can, I would do it. So awesome. So moving on from the drinks then. So for the audience here, I think maybe it'd be nice to, if you could maybe give us just a little background on maybe the best term for it, maybe like your author's journey, just kind of where you started writing to leading us until today.
My writing journey has been pretty much like my piano journey. I've just always done it. I think it had its basis, like many children who write. My mother was a reader, and she read to me, and it was a treasure. Before I could read words myself, my mother reading to me at bedtime and other times. And there were some beautiful books in our household. She had this big old a folio of Grimm's fairy tales with, I think, an Arthur Rackham illustration on the front page of each one. And I was rapt reading those as a child. And so I think I got this notion in my mind, literally, that the most important thing in the world was a book. And to have written one just seemed to be extraordinary. And I have a moment from my childhood, I think it was 9 or 10, no, younger, maybe 7 or 8, that I've written about when I decided that I was a writer, and I got a one of those bound dime store books, and I set up in the afternoon, and I maybe for an hour, which seemed a long time to me then, I wrote all the words I knew. I wrote my name several times. I wrote of, the, and certain other words I knew, and I filled page after page. And with each one, I felt, yeah, I am. I'm doing it. I'm look at, there's a page of this. I'm a writer. I think I've improved since then, but it's the feeling, literally the feeling has never left me. I think that what I loved in school most, I remember in high school, the most was reading fiction. I remember I went to a public high school, and the English book you had every year was a big fat folio of sort of selected American writers, British writers, and so forth. And they were usually in the excerpt, and then there was a picture and a bio of the writers in these big textbooks. And those bios and the pictures fascinated me, that these characters had written the book. And I grew up in Illinois, and for some reason, the American literature book we had was full of Illinois writers, Vachel Lindsay and Carl Sandburg and others. And I just thought, yeah, when you grow up in Illinois, there's a good chance you can become a writer. And so it fascinated me. And I wrote, and the first things I think I wrote were intentional imitation, even satire of other writers that were assigned to me. And then I think when reading Catcher in the Rye in high school, which was then, when I was in high school, I'm old, it was forbidden. I mean, the book was forbidden. It was not in the school library. It was not in the town library. It was considered to be kind of a racy book. And but I got hold of a copy of it, and I less read it than I entered it, and I felt, oh, here's somebody who at last understands that. Like many people, millions of boys who read Catcher in the Rye. But I remember doing some imitation writing in that voice, and then thankfully getting out of it and finding my own voice. But I've in the places I've been, I worked for the town newspaper as a boy. I was an editor of my high school paper. I was the editor of my college paper. I was writing all the time, and hoping one day to write for publication. And I had a moment. I think I was 24 years old when I felt I was a writer, because I was finishing my doctorate in political theory, and I was in Cambridge, England, which I needed to be in order to do this finished his thesis, and I was really homesick. I'd never been abroad before, and I was married, but I was still really, really homesick. And Pat read tons of poetry and was mailing out manuscripts, my own, all the time, and hoping to get something back, and usually not getting anything back, or getting it certainly not getting acceptances back. And then one day, in the post came a letter from the New York Times, which used to publish poems on the letters page on Saturday, and they accepted a poem of mine, and the acceptance included a check for $35, and there I was, the New York Times, and $35, and so I was launched.
Right.
I will not tell you the story of my 30 or 40 subsequent books, because that would be too long a story. But right. that moment on the front stoop of my flat in Cambridge with the $35 was just monumental to me.
Sure, that's lovely. I think a lot of writers can sympathize with that too. That first kind of like, well, there was the old actress. I was like, they want me. They really want me. Like we all get that own like kind of experience when you get one of those, especially that first check, even if it's small. I was like, oh my gosh, someone paid me for this. Like I was doing this for free until this moment. Keeping with the theme, so and for anyone that hasn't read it, there's the 3 Lives of Jonathan Force. And correct me if I misstate any of this, please. And I even post it every time I make mistakes. I just post it out there, like, look at me be an idiot. But it's told it basically it's kind of like 3 books. There's the early life, then there's midlife, and then there's later life. And so switching back to early life, because you're talking about your childhood some with the reading. I think that's a lovely story, by the way, just the of and all of that. And like, I'm doing it. Like that's what a memory. What was your child like, generally?
Well, it was a probably impossible to replicate childhood. I was born in 1945. My father was actually in the Pacific serving. And so they grew up in that incredible period of time between the end of that war and the Kennedy assassination. Was a time almost impossible to describe now. It was a time when you felt safely held. I was also in the middle of the country. I was in a suburb of Chicago called Arlington Heights, Illinois, which was like the towns that Norman Rockwell painted on the cover of the Saturday Review. I mean, and that was not a trite rendering to me. That was the way life was. You were safe in town. You rode your bike to school. The school seemed very substantial and important, and big events were like the homecoming queen and king of the high school, and I was safe and I was secure and in a happy family, and maybe because of that I was a little inured to anything that was bad, that was dangerous, and so forth. That was societally threatening, because nothing felt threatening in that period of time. And so in a way, that might be an obstacle to writing in some ways, because there's a strong case that some sort of psychic wound or trauma is essential to write. Edmund Wilson, the great critic, wrote a book called essay called "The Wound of Philoctetes," in which says every writer has to have a wound. And as Auden said of Yeats when he died, Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry. And I didn't have a wound. I think there were wounds later, and I think I worked them into both memoir that I've written and also into fiction that I've written. But I was maybe handicapped by an awfully happy and stable and safe childhood. And actually, I did most of my writing. I didn't have an early start. I was not a boy genius prodigy. I published my first novel when I was 34, 35. And then some poetry before and after that. And then on it went, about a book a year. It was certainly formative. I mean, this book you mentioned, The 3 Lives of Jonathan Force, it was originally, by the way, 3 books. And one of the publisher and I decided, well, we're going to make this kind of a doorstop book where they're all together, or we're going to make it 3 separate books. We decided on the big book but they're called Book 1, Book 2. And my inspiration for that book was in midlife, I've been a great fan of the writings of the psychologist Carl Jung. And one of his disciples, Robert Johnson, who recently died, he didn't live far from you. He was a favorite writer. He was a very clear, lucid writer. And one of his books is called Transformations. Is a sort of a theory of masculine development, which he says happens in 3 stages. You know, there's a boyhood stage, which is wonderful, which is where there's no end to imagination. There's all kinds of idealism and heroism and questing. A lot of it's silly, and that's why, you know, boys that age love quests, love Marvel comics and so forth. There's some beautiful things about it, and those beautiful things sometimes are chased out of you by practical necessity, and often by school. School itself chased out of you these wonderful dreamy instincts. The problem with the dreamy instincts is they don't match reality all that well, and you can't go on being that way. And so Robert Johnson said that the archetypal boy is Don Quixote, you know, with beautiful dreams, tilting at windmills, but they are windmills and they're not practical. But that sort of beautiful, hopeless quest is boyhood. And then, in order to thrive, in order to make practical, you know, arrangements with the world, you have to come off some of that dreaminess. You have to match yourself better to reality. You have to discern more, get smarter, get sharper, get more critical, and also get more jaded. So Robert Johnson said the middle life ideal archetype is Hamlet. Hamlet's the smartest person in the play. He sees everything. He sees through everything, but he's miserable. And if you don't get out of that misery, that's the trajectory of your life. You're a jaded. You know, the world's come to smash. You know better than everything, and you know, but you're not happy. So Robert Johnson suggests there's a way out of that, which is to open yourself up in life to the things that you admit that you don't know about and that you denied in your earlier life, and then in other words, that means denying all the things that define you as a hotshot, you know, as a striver, a succeeder, and so forth. And if you're able to do that, you're able to enter a new realm of understanding all the things you've never understood. And the model for that is Goethe's Faust, who makes this, you know, pact with the devil, you know, and explores Faust. If you remember his story, he was a great scholar, an alchemist, the best scholar there was, but he was miserable too. And he gets chafed out of that and then enters in this wild life, you know, of you know, he has a romance, he misbehaves, he confronts everything he had never confronted in his life. But then he reaches fulfillment. He understands, as Jung would say, both the light and dark side of himself. And so boyhood is Quixote, midlife is Hamlet, and old age, or realized old age, is Faust. And so first of all, I'm charmed by this. And by the time I was reading and contending with this, I was getting to be an old man myself. And I thought it worked. And so I was not writing an autobiography, but I wanted to make a life, a true life that I felt combined those things. And so the first life of Jonathan Force is he's a spirited schoolboy, but some of the spirit is chafed out of him, and then he ends up, improbably and luckily, he's just an ordinary kid from the Midwest, but he goes to Yale. And he doesn't know what he's doing, and he's lost, and he regresses. He can't even get his meals right in the lunchroom, you know. And then it starts asking some reflective questions. He gets some lucky mentors. Then he becomes a brilliant scholar at Yale, and then he grows up and he becomes this pundit. His name is Jonathan Force, and he writes these books of cultural criticism. They're called things like force fields, uses of force, reasonable force, and so forth, which are explaining and predicting all the political elements of the day. He's in wild demand by political parties, by sellers of products, and so forth, and he becomes this national pundit. And then he, in his late middle life, has this sort of crisis of emptiness and doesn't quite know what he's doing, but he heads off. He's got a family, but he heads off, drives south to Key West, Florida, where he lives the rest of his life. It's kind of an affluent hermit, you know, and seeking no attention, but having some sort of interest, like Faust, having sort of interesting adventures. And then there's a kind of it takes him to his last breath, his dying breath, and he has some revelations, which I had to imagine and create, because unlike the other things, I can't narrate that yet. I haven't been there. But
Sure.
But I mean, that's kind of a quick tour through those 3 books. But that's what I was inspired very much by Johnson's model, then creating a living, breathing single person that would exemplify that model. That's what I tried to do.
Is it necessary that we lose that sense of wonder? Like, is it just that practical sense of going from a you can't, of course, always just think of terms of light and dark, and like, you do have to start like realizing there's context, and you have to.
No, that's Bill. That's an excellent question. Do you have to lose that sense of wonder? I think you can't ride it like a rocket to happiness, but I think the key to being happy in middle life and beyond is, first of all, that doesn't die. No, that's like a shaft of feeling within you. And the problem developmentally, I think, is to shut that off and repress that. Say, oh, that's when I thought as a child. No, it's there, and to be able to access it is saving and healing. It keeps you from withering up, and drying out, no. So I think a book I wrote, a nonfiction book I wrote that I think it might be a favorite, is I taught in a boys' school my whole working life. And then it was such fascinating material. I wrote a book called Boys Will Be Men, about what I thought nobody got about boys, that this irrepressible, some of it was tragic, some of it was comic, but it did, about 100-page central section of that book was sketches of actual boys, and they were based very closely on the real boys I taught. And one of the things I think that was in that, of course, that the boys reminded me of, that it was such a great job to have for me, was that I was still there, where I had to be in charge. I was their teacher, and then for almost 20 years I was a headmaster of the school, so I had to be in charge. I had to be orderly. But they reminded me, and also I think it was helpful to remember that. When I was guiding or disciplining or doing those things to boys who do the most preposterously awful, silly things and so forth. And, part of me was like saying, how could you? And then I realized, I know I was there. I know that thing. In my novel, Headmaster's Papers, that you mentioned, that's written as a first person from a standpoint of a headmaster who was not like me. He was much older, and he was at boarding school in New England. But one of the disciplinary events he has to discipline, a boy is cut all the in the science, they have gerbils they do experiments with and so forth. This boy cuts all the tails off the gerbils, and it's found out it's an outrage. The other kids are really sad because they really like the gerbils, and this kid becomes this sort of pariah and outlaw. And what are you going to do with him? And I think the ultimate understanding is, can you get inside the head of a kid who cuts the tails off the gerbils? Maybe you can, and if you can, maybe you can get past that. I remember that was the only event in that novel that actually was based on an actual event in my school. A boy actually did that. And the biggest problem, I thought the boy was counseled and handled properly, but the biggest problem was what to do with the gerbils, because their taillessness reminded everybody, all the boys and everything, what had happened, and we all needed to get. So we had to displace and find homes for all the gerbils and get ones with tails, so that they school could go on.
Right, sure. That's a lovely story. I wonder, as just as a parent. Well, yeah, I like to say lovely. I have certain words I just plug in to go on, so forgive me. But one of the things I think about quite often is just this idea of redemption, right? And we love redemption stories, but when someone actually crashes, we tend to just want to bury them and not like open up that opportunity. Generally, everyone has kind of their bar on where they'll go with that. It's okay, I can forgive you up to this point, or I forgive you up to this point. And then there's like, okay, animals is here. I can never forgive you for that thing. But not accepting that people at different stages of our lives can almost be different people, like entirely, right? We can change a lot over time, but then also like we can learn and we can grow, and we can make mistakes that are horrible and painful and hurt other people. But where do we place those people in society? And where do we place those, especially when they're kids, especially when they're in this case boys, and they have these whatever wild imaginings, these things going on in their head, and then lack of discipline to not go through with them. Like, I remember my son, I asked him to help me. We were making some barbecue ribs, and I like to make my own barbecue sauce and dry rub and stuff. And the dry rub, we hadn't been home for some months because of some housework, and it was in like clumps. So I'm like, okay, look, I'm going to rub it into the ribs. Can you? But I don't want to keep having to touch the spoon and all this stuff going back and forth. Just scoop it on there, and I'm going to rub it in. So he's doing it, but then he decides to do it this way, this that way, and there's just stuff going everywhere. I'm like, why in the world this is happening? And it's like, oh, I can remember being a kid. It's happening because it seemed fun in that moment. It seemed, interesting in that moment for him. And so it's like, oh, but then when you're older, right? It's like my first reaction was like, no, why? Like, I'm just trying to get this job done. And now you've made getting that job done harder. And the more important thing in that moment was really just the spending time together and like having like a little connection and letting him maybe like have a little rope to play and experience and having fond memory. But instead I go, no, my job is, crushed here.
Yeah. Well, yeah, the parent role is not identical to, but it is a lot like the teacher's teaching role. And the thing I think I had to learn in my professional life was especially when you've got a problem, like there's been some theft in the school in lockers, and we stress not locking lockers because we want theft, and it's bothering you, and it's getting, maybe the parents are getting concerned. Is this a safe school? If my son's stuff is not safe in lockers, and then you finally get the thief or thieves, and there's sort of an aha feeling. And what could be more wrong than stealing when you've got this code against stealing, and he's done the stealing, and that should be very clear. And then, in a way, you have to justice that, and you have to make it dramatic for the school because it's a bad thing for not to be secure in your possessions. But then the thing I learned was, yes, the justice is important, but then the most important thing is that kid's 14 years old or 12 or 16. What is going to happen to him as a result of what happens? Should that event, you were expelled from the school for stealing, and is that going to mark you? And is that also going to define you? The boy himself, I'm a thief. Or is there a way to convince him that among many other things, you're not a thief, but among many other things, you are capable of doing that. You did that. What are we going to do about it? And how? And in other words, the thing you most want, if your heart's the right place, finally, is that he is not a thief. Yes, it can be like we all lie, but we're not liars, And so you want him to have that definition of himself. You want him to understand it. You want the best defense against his ever stealing anything again being himself, not the cops or his parents or and so that's the work to be done. It's a little harder outside of school, beyond school, of adults and society. But I think some of the same aims are true. There's this feeling when you caught the miscreant that it's over, and he can feel that shame and suffer those consequences. But no job is done then. Matter of fact, play that wrong, and you've got a worse thief to follow.
It kind of brings me actually to my next question: is getting back to that kind of sense of wonder. What would you say, parents, teachers, how do we foster that for kids nowadays, boys and girls? How do we foster that sense of wonder without, just allowing stealing and tails being cut off? How do we foster that in a healthy way?
First of all, most of the ways kids express that wonder is built in, and it's infectious. It's actually quite attractive, that enthusiasm, and my message, because I for decades I spoke to parents about things, about suggested things I hope they would do with their children. And unfortunately, I think we developed in the last century this kind of scientific view of child development, that it was stage development, that it unfolded. Freud had the theory of stage developments, and disciples as Erik Erikson did too, and Jean Piaget, the Swiss development. That in other words, you pass from the stage to more cognition, to this, to that, and then you transition into an adult. In other words, and that these stages should be sequenced. And if they're not, if you're arrested, if you haven't passed successfully in this, then you need a special remediation and to get you on track. Well, I prefer the notion. It's more a literary than psychologist notion of that you don't unfold in stages. You unfold according to a kind of a destiny. I mean, I actually think another great Jungian psychologist, James Hillman, said that we're not developed stage by stage, tabula rasa, by good schools and good parenting, and then we become these successful adults. No, we unfold, and I think what I urge parents to do and my colleagues to do was, let's be more a witness to what's unfolding than trying to say, oh, I've got to shape it. You haven't got to. You're not able to do the cognitive things necessary for geometry yet. Let me put you in summer school and get that going. See what's unfolding. When geometry is ready to happen, by the way, it happens. And sometimes it's grade age 15, you're not there, but at 17, you're really there. And if we can become a witness to the unfolding of what's going on with the child instead of a shaper of him, so that he will, get all the traditional prizes in school, and then get the right kind of college, and then do the right kind of thing. Even though no thoughtful, educated parent would say they're doing that, they do it. That's what they actually do, and they're really frightened if a kid gets off the path. He's drawing an awful lot, or he's spending a lot of time with that guitar. So I just think more loving witness to what's unfolding is both from a teacher standpoint and a parent standpoint is what's needed right now.
Sure. No, I think that makes perfect sense. I mean, I have we're a blended family. So I had two daughters very young. I married my wife, and she had a daughter who was pretty young when we married. I think Michaela was 2, 3-ish. She was 2 when we were seriously dating, but we got married right around there. And then we had our son, who's now 12. And with 4 kids, different situations, but just knowing them from young, that personality was just very different. There's that nature versus nurture that people always talk about. And then it seems like with Freud and a lot of the thinking, it was like we really said like so much of it is nurture. But I think there's, nature, destiny, whatever you want to call it. There's a person that comes in, you want to call it the soul that comes in, like whatever your viewpoint is, they come and there's something there. And you want to I think that's a beautiful way to think of it, is you want to see that unfold versus trying to mold it at every stage. And I think that's where a lot of that conflict comes in, is because it's this person emerging, and then we're trying to mold it into something else actively as it goes. And it's like, no, this is 7th grade. You have to know this, or you're going to be that child that's left behind. And so you go on. So the schools are doing it. They're pressuring the parents are doing it. And I think it's the kids that get the short end of the deal most of the time.
I think literature, especially great literature, is really helpful in this regard. Literature is a corrective. I mean, if you think about Dickens, and those the boy protagonists of Dickens, David Copperfield and Pip and Great Expectations and so forth, those are wonderful stories about, in spite of what all these social pressures, how those boys' nature unfolds and grows. And Hermann Hesse, I don't know if you read much Hermann Hesse, but he was very, very big when I was in college and beyond. He won the Nobel Prize in 1948. When he won the Nobel Prize, Time magazine said Americans will never read him. And then, of course, in the 60s and 70s, when I was beginning a tour, Hermann Hesse was like the guru of all. I mean, Steppenwolf and Siddhartha and so forth. But every single one of his novels is a story of a boy not chafed out of his nature by circumstances or family or so forth or schools, and then being wounded almost to death, and then finding it, like blossoming. And so, Wordsworth too. I mean, so many writers do this really well. did you're kind of young compared to me, but say, did you have to read Catcher in the Rye in school?
I didn't, but I have read Catcher in the Rye. I think I read it when I was 18. I think it was 18, 19. It was the first book I ever read. And it's a fairly short book, but the first book I ever read in one sitting. I picked that up, and then the rest of my night was Catcher in the Rye devoted.
Yeah. And of course, it's had this transformative effect on generations. I'm not sure it still resonates the way it did from probably for 5 decades. But that is, again, the story of a soul, a pure soul, that he was as the world was reckoning, was failing, and he's chafed into having a nervous breakdown, and it comes. But the sort of purity of his approach to life, and it's funny and he's touching, is what I think sold it. And that was, I think the book was a healing, really a healing message to the boys of the 1950s and the 1960s, especially when things were, what was culturally allowed was so narrow, and of course the Beat generation broke that out, and the 50s turned into the counterculture 60s, but it was, I think it's never been put. Jane Eyre, for that matter, every time somebody tries to write about childhood truly and from experience, they identify this theme of this unkillable thing. You called it joy or earlier, dreaminess. It's I think as long as we're free to intelligently address childhood and write about it, I think that'll come up. I hope so.
And then I think you also wrote the essay. Let's see, I have it on my notes here. The Masculinity, Stalled Males, and the Emergence of Donald Trump. So, and it's that idea of stalled males. I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's, and the books have been written called The End of Men and so forth. And today, just reading this week, that people are so concerned. For instance, today in undergraduate colleges and universities, 2/3 of the enrollees are female. So more men are not considering going to college than ever before, even when it would be possible. They're thriving less well than women. They drop out more when they're there. And this has got bad implications, I think, for the future of the culture. And that we're not doing well by boys and men. And I think one of the reasons that there was a bad development that I wrote a lot about in my 30s and 40s that because of certain feminist necessities like equal pay for equal work and some really bad patriarchal policies and hierarchies in businesses and so forth, and a lot of things were coming very clear that we're skewed in a bad way against the rights of girls and women. And so this powerful effusion, several waves of feminism were commenting on that. One of the artifacts of that, a bad one in my opinion, was the notion that males are toxic. And the only thing that what you've got to do, since they're bad overall, and if you put them together, they're really bad. So don't do Boy Scouts anymore, and don't do all men softball teams, and don't do fraternities. There are a lot of things wrong with some all male organizations, but the whole idea that if you let them be the way they want to be, and if you especially if you put them together, volumes have been written about toxic masculinity, and no doubt there is some toxic masculinity, but there's also the non-toxic necessary masculinity, I think. And I think we went through, due to some goodwill, for instance, the state of Maryland and other places, banishing dodgeball from the PE curriculum because it's throwing things at people, it's too violent. And then we can't have so many martial heroes or any martial heroes in the books. We're not going to read about generals anymore and winning and warriors. We're going to take those statues down and all kinds of well-meaning things. Let's make a kinder, gentler boy. Well, the actual boy, however kind or gentle, was not finding himself in school, not finding himself in what in the books that were read and basically the myths that were being championed instead of the old ones. And they found their myths, but they found it in video games like Grand
Theft Auto, I think is
Grand
the name
Theft Auto, which was the bane of my school for a while, and other things, way darker things. Some of the research I did when I was very concerned about failure of males, school-age boys to thrive was I went into the weeds of the background of the Columbine killers and the Jonesboro, Arkansas killers and the other, and then found out what they read. The world of the two Columbine boys, for instance, they shared the same dark video games, these apocalyptic landscapes and so forth, where there was only terror and waste and ruin, and the survival was by sort of violent aggression. I mean, boys found themselves in that. I mean, they learned not to say the wrong thing. They could learn not to address a female with these terms. They might learn all kinds of things, but that was getting them by until they could get home and do what they wanted. And so I think there was so little positive guidance of boys, but they found their own dreamscape, in some really dark things. And we're not out of it yet, in my opinion. And the stalled males, which I think I would describe a lot of the males in the MAGA persuasion in the United States right now, are people that looked ahead. Economically, they didn't see much going on that was in their favor. How did that happen? And how did these greedy liberals get in charge of everything? And how did people of color get everything? And why are we supposed to be so good to them? And when we've got plenty of wounds and deficits in our own lives, and so the America that I think the professor want to make great again is an America that never existed, but it was a white America, and it was a one where you could behave the way you wanted to, and it's like their president Trump, tell it like it is, and find release in that way, because the popular culture as presented, in mainstream media and other ways, didn't include them, and so. Again, this is a generation of males who couldn't find themselves in school, couldn't find themselves in an upwardly mobile order, stalled. There's a case that males are sometimes stalling the transition to young adulthood from adolescence till when they're early 30s, living together and kind of male, still playing the video games and still and kind of sure. They're kind of affectionate with each other, but they're not moving forward. Movies have been made of these, whether you call them originally slackers or whatever you call them, of just people, bumming around maybe amusingly, and having Bill and Ted having a big adventure or whatever. But like kind of lovable losers. It's a failure to, in my opinion, to realize the best of what's masculine. So.
Sure. Yeah, my wife and I forget where we were. I like to watch the local news when we travel, just to get a sense for the place. And so we went, wherever it was. Maybe we were in San Diego just for the weekend, and we had the San Diego news on. And the leading story of like the 11 o'clock news or whatever it is at the end of the day was male enrollment is down like 50% or something at local colleges, but MBA programs continue to have 60% of males. What's the problem? And then the whole story was about how they need to get more women in the MBA program. And even my wife was like, it's so weird that like they just said there's this huge departure of men from school in general, and then they just picked this small portion and went, but that still has too much men, and how do we do it? And it's a male guy, it's a male reporter talking about it, and you're like, well, it makes it sound like just being male is bad, right? It's like, no, it's maybe not even bad, just that's not what's most important. Can we just set that aside, because all these things are more important? And it always feels like we're on a pendulum. I mean, I've been, just the 25, 30 years that I've been paying attention to society more than just a child, right? Is we just tend to have this pendulum. Just it's okay. Here's a problem here. There's too much male representation, and then we have good intentions, but then we swing kind of wildly the opposite way, and never seem to find that equilibrium.
Yeah, I think the reason one goes to those extremes, I love that example you just gave of this. I mean, an identified problem. Males are not enrolling in undergraduate institutions. On the other hand, females are, and that female success is a really good thing culturally. I mean, those
Right.
equal pay for equal work, getting rid of glass ceilings. I mean, having women who can do things, do them without encumbrance. That's a wonderful thing, not just for women. That's a wonderful thing culturally. But then to link that to, I mean, like where women have less access, that's a male problem, and we should continue to monitor and diminish men. I mean, that's just it's a failure of discernment. That, I mean, those are unrelated issues and unrelated problems, and we need to separate them. It's not like, well, if male medical enrollment rose to 90% again, the way it once was, that would be males are reemerging. No, I probably something like, I'm guessing, given the way people break down, that probably 50-50 medical school enrollment would be a pretty good thing. But I hope that each 50% would be equally talented and able to do it. Sure. And it's not one gender winning or another gender winning. Right. Sure. I do think, though, some of the excesses of male only patriarchal culture have inflamed, the feminist voices to be maybe understandably suspicious and irrational and maybe angry. I mean, sure. First of all, I don't believe in toxic masculinity at all, but I certainly don't believe in toxic childhood, toxic male babies and so forth. And in other words, we have to love and nurture them. And then, again, not the way we want to necessarily shape them to be, but as they unfold. I forgot the constellation. You have boys and girls in your household, right?
You have 1 boy, 3 girls.
Now, in any way, we're doing a little bit of research here. In any way, as your son behaved in some ways that boys stereotypically are supposed to behave like, maybe he wanted to discharge guns, or wanted to play with, or wanted to do aggressive play with weapons. Did that ever happen?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, is my the middle daughter, Cassidy, we were talking a few weeks back, and she was like, I always appreciated that you let me be a tomboy. Like, you kind of let me do what I was interested in and things. And, and you didn't make it a thing. You just, I like to play basketball. You went and played basketball with me. You just let it. And so that's kind of been the case with all of them. But now with my son, we have, like, it's literally sitting in the corner back here. There is this giant corner of foam swords, because he loves to get those swords and just sword fight and bang around at each other. And to this day, he still will come up to me and start bullying me, and I have to fight back and put him back in his place. But he's way more like aggressive that way than the girls were, and it wasn't like we tried to fit them in. And they just we let all 3 of them do what they're interested in, and that's what he gravitated towards. So.
Yeah, I just think it's as you say, it's just so interesting to watch children unfold. I mean, for instance, tomboyism or so for the only thing that never defined was because there was a model that didn't match how girls actually were. That said, girls are want to do these gentler pursuits, and a girl out of that pattern is labeled in a certain way. If we could get rid of, just witness the unfolding and how it is, and then essentially something that's really harmful, you have to address it. But a lot of it's not harmful. It's just a different way of expressing. And some of my most hilarious observations of parents of boys is when they're really, including my own daughters, when they really didn't want their kids. There's certainly going to be no gun playthings. There are going to be no violent toys. They stress kind of kinder, gentler stories and so forth. But they would pick up a doll bed and make it a weapon. They would and want to do sure. and want to do kind of aggressive play. And right. I think that has been accommodated, but trying to deny it and suppress it is just silly. I think you've heard more unsolicited opinions from me than you probably want, but I believe our country is in the thrall of a preposterous, embarrassing gun madness. That never should have developed, and didn't have to have developed. We're the only developed nation in the world that has this embarrassing proliferation of civilian firearms. Anyways, I understand that Henry David Thoreau wrote about, a lot of people have written about boys' fascination with hunting, with firearm, with gun, and so forth. And I believe it's almost universal. And if you read the first book of Jonathan Force, he's also in thrall of guns, as indeed I was. And I think, as Thoreau said, you have it, but the important thing is to grow past it. He said, Thoreau said he didn't trust a pacifist who didn't love to hunt as a boy. Because maybe you were just too scared to be the way you're supposed to be. But no. I mean, the things that hunters want to do with guns are understandable. We have to grow past the owning of an assault weapon, as to be something that would satisfy your nature and your adequacy. And we haven't. Too many former boys haven't done it, and it's we live in an era, therefore, for the time being, where it's terrifying for a child to have to imagine to go to school, because that thing, you can't say it only happens in Columbine or only happens in it happens everywhere, as you know. Anyways, off the soapbox.
Maybe we could, transition here past just boyhood. We've talked a bunch about boys and boyhood and childhood. So you were the headmaster for how many years?
I was 17 years at the school. I worked at the school for my whole teaching life. And then the last 17, I was headmaster.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. You're at the same school. That is a voyage in itself. I'm sure you saw a lot of change in the years going through that. And I believe I read that you wrote the headmaster's papers before you were headmaster.
I did.
And you had already mentioned that the headmaster in that story is much different than you. So it clearly wasn't kind of a autobiographical kind of pursuit. Was that something already in your thought pattern, in your psyche, to move on to kind of to grow your career to be the headmaster one day? Or was that something that you've stumbled into? How did that take place?
Stumbling is the right term for how I came to work in school. I was a graduate student in political science in Cleveland, and I wanted to get married, and I proposed marriage to my wife, who lived far away, and it dawned on me I needed to have a job, and then I heard about an opening in this boys' school in Shaker Heights, Ohio, called University School. And somehow I didn't have a car then, but I made my way and interviewed, and I got this job teaching, and it hadn't been quite my plans, and it was teaching history, ancient history and civic government to 14, 15-year-old boys, and I found it. First of all, I found the school very, very impressive and demanding, and I worked really, really hard to try to master teaching these classes, and it was just I was also a full-time graduate student as I was doing it, and it just seemed almost impossible, but everything about it was good. I mean, I've been failing to do having a flat class or something like that. It never seemed to be the boys' fault. It was like, oh my, I didn't. But so working my way through it in those days without much guidance, but working my way through it, and finally establishing this relational rhythm with the boys, and actually, I liked what I was teaching, and I always liked what I was teaching. Anyways, I sort of went through this ordeal of fire, and emerged on the end of it, really liking it. And then the texture of school life. This was quite a good school. The kids did well scholastically. It was athletically a very good school. Everything except maybe the arts at first, which then got better. Was great to see it. And I'd gone to co-ed schools all through my childhood, and Middlebury College, the college where I went, was also co-ed. So I'd never been in a boys' school, and I kind of thought maybe it'll change. Maybe it will become a co-ed school. So if I have kids and they're girls, they could go to it. So I didn't have any thought about it. But then I thought, there's some really interesting things about this boy-boy dynamic. And first of all, one of the things was its sincerity and authenticity. The kids were so frank, and in class, there was no, they just started with the first kid raising an hand, asking a question. They were totally unself-conscious. without girls around. They weren't posing and trying. The big, fast developing kids weren't lording it over the little ones. It was just there was a kind of openness that I'd never experienced, and I want that. That's why I wanted to write about it. But I don't think anyone else had in that book, Boys Will Be Men. But I think you're asking me the question of how I came to write a novel about a headmaster. At one point in my trajectory through the school, I was the dean of students, which is in charge of discipline, including serious discipline. And I remember we had a really serious disciplinary case where a bunch of boys who were the editors of the yearbook of the school had gone off with their faculty advisor, to this conference where they're going to learn how to be better yearbook advisors, and they misbehaved. They brought beer into their motel room. They were told not to. Obviously, it was against school rules and so forth. And they got caught by the owner of the motel. They were disgraced. The faculty advisor drove them home, and we had to discipline this thing. And we just established a really tough substances policy, like no second chance. Because it was really school life was getting dangerous. But we took this very strict policy, of which I was an advocate, and I was also in charge of it. So these kids had done it dead to right, and they were really kind of great kids. Otherwise, lovable leaders in the school, and then their faculty advisor, the young guy, who then said, it's my fault, because when we were driving up, they were joking about getting beer. And I said, yeah. Well, you better not, or I better not see it. He said, that was my fault. They would, and he meant it. I think he wanted to take the blame. And then I realized, well, yeah, it kind of was, but it kind of, I could see why the boys would do it. But then, are we going to keep this strict rule or not? And so the way our school worked, the students, jury deliberated on it. The faculty, we had many faculty meetings, and half the faculty said, we took the stand. We're going to keep it or not? And the other faculty, come on. And so I remember going home one night after saying, I didn't know what the right answer was. And we had a nice family. My girls were little then, and we had a fun meal. And we were laughing and joking around. And I remember thinking, life is going to go on because I have this support. I got to go home and have this support, put things in perspective. And then I imagined a school head who didn't have that support, who didn't have the props, and so I imagined this man, a good man, who was a good headmaster of the school, anyways, I can't do the whole thing, but his props had fallen away. He didn't have any. All he had was his commitment to do it right, and the demands were so great. They undid him. They didn't undo his principle. Sure. It's not a disillusioned book finally, but it was about. And that was what started the novel. I wrote a note up in my notebook after the kids were in bed. But imagine a good man whose props have fallen away, and that was my start. And so because a friend of mine who also loves school life had given me all these books about headmasters, real ones. There's some famous headmaster of Groton School in Massachusetts called he was Endicott Peabody, and I had lives of these other great English and American headmasters, and so I kind of fused them into a guy, and really felt I was in his shoes and in his clothes and so forth. And so I wrote, and it's all letters. It's all letters and announcements, and so it's all one-way written communication from him, called the Headmaster's Papers. So, but it was like I wanted to give a voice to the richness of the school life, the complexity of it, including the gerbils when they were detailed.
How did that story end? So when you were telling about the students that with the beer, did they end up getting kicked out, or what was the outcome?
No, they didn't. They didn't. We ended up. We were very strict. They lost their positions. Some of them were captains of teams. Some of them were editors of this and that. They lost their positions. They had to do some community service with lower school boys, and then they were able to come back to school. They all graduated. They all did pretty. Their parents, I believe, thought we treated them cruelly and unfairly, and in some cases they opened up a distance to us which we didn't have before. Most of the stories of the boys were good stories, but we didn't do it, but we retained the policy, and we said the only reason we departed from the policy because we faculty didn't do our job. we didn't. So that was how we resolved it, whether it was right or wrong.
Sure. And you mentioned with the Headmaster papers, I know it was all his letters. What's the term for that?
Epistolary. Yeah.
Epistolary fiction. Yeah. So I was wondering about that in general, because I know I was reading one of the critical things of one of your works, that it was, I think it's Grieve's passing. Which actually, because we had met, I don't remember if I mentioned this in our conversations, but when you were in South Carolina for one of the Short Story America festivals, when you had that book, my wife and I actually met you there, and I gave that book to my mom as the signed copy of it to my mom for Christmas that year. So thank you for the Christmas present.
Well, you're welcome.
Yeah, and I know that one was a lot of like journal entries and things. So I guess the first part would be just generally speaking with your writing, since it's not that just standard third person, first person kind of their framework you would throw it in. Does the story kind of come to you in that form? Is it, you have an idea and for a story and you think it would be better off with told through letters versus another avenue?
Yeah, I had never thought. I mean, I had done some first person narration, third person narration, and that's what I really thought there was for fiction. I never thought much about epistolary novel, although I'd read there's a wonderful, very funny story, some short stories in epistolary form by Ring Lardner and some other things. But then there was a best-selling novel a summer or two before I did Headmaster's paper called Women of Independent Means by a woman named Elizabeth Haley Forsyth. And it got a lot of attention. I read it, and I didn't like it. I thought it was an artistic failure, because even though it was a novel of letters, she did things in the letters. She filled in things in letters that you'd never fill in a letter. She did it so she could keep her plot going and so forth. It's like my opinion of a bad play, when characters come on and say things that characters wouldn't say in order for you to get background that you need to follow the play. That's bad playwriting, in my opinion. So I remember thinking, this is not very good. But on the other hand, I said, something I liked about the epistolary form. I thought, especially from relating school life, you wouldn't have to fill in all the cracks, and then this happened, and then you could just. And matter of fact, the distance between the time distance and the understanding difference between the different things allows the reader to make the connections. Like oh my God, that has happened, or how is he dealing with this given something or other that you do the work, kind of mental work you do reading, filling in all the stuff that's not in the letters. I thought was really work for it, and I think it did. So I think that form is great in that way.
Well, it engages you a little more, right? It engages the imagination. Like I don't like work that's too minutely detailed all the time, because I think like it takes away you filling in the blanks. Like I don't need to know every line on the person's face, because you know what? I will start to fill that in. Give me the broad strokes, and then let me fill in. Give me the important stuff, and then let me fill in the nuance. And I'll connect more, because that'll be a personal thing.
Bill, there's a brilliant, in my opinion, a brilliant and beloved fiction writer, still alive in her 90s, Helma Wallitzer, who, when I was teaching at the Breadloaf Writers Conference, which I did for a number of years in the 80s and 90s, she was one of the master teachers there. And she all the teachers there would give an hour-long lecture as part of the summer program. And hers was on leaving things out. And said, after the primal scene or the dramatic scene of love betrayal, you don't have to back the character out the door, get him down the stairs, get him out to his car, and you can just sure. You can just go on to another unconnected event. But I mean, that really is sometimes when I'm still to this day, I think, why did I write all that interstitial stuff? It doesn't just get to the other place right away. Readers can fill it in. Yeah.
And I wondered generally just about letters, right? Because I have one here. So I wrote a satirical collection of short stories that are holiday themed. And the concept, though, is that it was two writers that met before the pandemic. And so right before like February 2020, they meet at this writers convention. They have this like liaison that's unspecified in the supply closet. And then they're going to meet up and talk more. But then the pandemic hits and the guy decides to start writing letters to her. And this is 2020. This is past kind of the regular letter writing stage, right? So then she literally writes emails and prints the emails and sends them. And so it becomes kind of a satirical thing. And then the stories, they share stories because they're writers. And that's kind of the concept. So it made me think a lot. And probably I was thinking about this beforehand, which is why that concept came to me was I wish I had a pen pal. Right. Like I think that magic of having a little distance, a little time between everything is like really magical. And it's mostly been lost. Is even email, which is maybe the corollary now, which people have even gone away from email. Now it's like a text. And then now the text are emojis and keeps evolving down further and further. What do you think about that? Like just letter writing in general? Do you think that's something that's been lost? Is it worthy of my mourn as I write whole books about it? Or
I think just empirically, you have to say, yeah, we have lost letters. It stopped. I mean, I am hopelessly addicted letter writer. I love paper letters. I also like emails, and I mean, I really like emailing. But I worry that, especially given the literary history that I hope we can manage, one of our understandings of great writers. I just finished an enormous second volume of Robert Crawford's biography of T.S. Eliot, and he had the letters of Eliot and of his lovers, unknown for 50 years, and that were preserved. People preserved their letters. They gave them to university libraries and so forth. And these incredible records that we have, and in some letter collections, our writers are better than the fictions. I mean, they're just wonderful. Sure. Evelyn Waugh's letters, for instance, which so first of all, we're going to lose those documents because we're not writing and saving letters like that anymore. And I don't know enough about technology to know if emails can be preserved or recovered and so forth. What happens?
They literally can't be deleted. Anything you put online is available till the end of time. But it's what I wonder though is how easily retrievable they are. Like if I gave my email password to my wife, I'm sure she could collect them and send them. Not that some library particularly wants them, but that would be a possibility. But if you didn't think ahead, and I also wonder the amount of them. If you really think about like, oh, we're going to try to T.S. Eliot's alive now, and we want to get his emails and his text messages and his social media, right? I mean, you start hitting on this. There's so much noise. The career I previously worked in, I was a director for a quality regulatory department and make medical devices, right? There's lots of product going out. You want to know how well they're doing. But there's always that, how much data you get, how much is just noise, how much is just what you don't want to pay attention to versus this is signal. This is what you want to pay attention to. And that's the hard part, I would think, with trying to gather back from people from 10 years ago or so when email and everything kind of really took over, and maybe even longer, but kind of that, era. To now is just how much communication goes. That's just emoji, right? It's just
it sounds like from what you say, it still might be possible to mine emails from people whose emails you might be interested in, but it would take even more colossally dedicated editing than I mean, letters collections now are beautifully edited, and the people dedicate their lives to doing that, as this man Crawford did for T.S. Eliot. But I guess, for instance, I think my present publisher, it's a small press called Orchizes Books, and he's a small press. He's kind of a belles lettres guy. He does facsimiles of great work. He does facsimiles of Dickens and Joyce, and so he's printed. He's he's exclusively some poems of Auden and so forth, and a lot of contemporary poets, not maybe famous or to the ear, but exactly my kind of, for me, my kind of publisher, and he's become a friend, and we corresponded. I'd say several times a week, and I almost something in me would like to preserve that correspondence. I mean, I don't know, I'm not notable enough or famous enough that anyone would want to do that on my account, but there's something kind of lovely about this thing, because I think he's conscious of it too. We're kind of careful about what we say, it's not just, how you doing? And I can go back to his letters and mine to him and read them with a kind of pleasure. So I don't know how much of that is going on these days, but if it were ever done, I suppose an editor could make something. Do you know the novel 84 Charing Cross Road? Which is it's actually not a novel. It's a true collection of real letters between a New York writer named Ellen. I'm going to say Hansford. I might have that wrong. And a book dealer on 84 Charing Cross Road in England. And she was a kind of cranky intellectual person, a minor TV and radio writer, I think. And she wanted all these books, these 19th century, 18th century editions of poets and so forth. And then she found this very thoughtful guy who would find them used, and then he'd send them to her. And then they began corresponding. It became this beautiful correspondence. It was made into a movie with Anne Bancroft as the female writer, and Anthony Hopkins was the book dealer. And it was you have to see it. The movie's a masterpiece. The exchange of letters, the book is a masterpiece. 84 Charing Cross Road. So I mean, and that's lovely that somebody that figured that out. That was imagine how small those subjects were, and it became a bestseller. It was a masterpiece, a great movie. So I guess whatever the medium, if we continue to care for the written word, whether it's in a text or whether it's in a written in foolscap, on ink, I think that's the important thing, and that first of all, that there's something worthy of preserving, and that we find it.
I think it's lovely, and I do worry it's a bit of a dead language, but I think there is that bit with emails that people tend to be a little more cautious, and then if you do get a little bit of an email pal, then it gets to be where I think, like you mentioned your publisher or editor, that okay, now we're both a little more careful and thinking about what we're writing here, versus just shooting off an emoji and what's for dinner, like whatever might be happening. I wonder in general, I think there was, let's see, I think I have it here. There was a really lovely, unfortunately I didn't write the writer's name down, but I'll quote it, and then I will in the show notes make sure to give her due, or his due. I think it was a her, but I might be completely wrong. They were speaking about the three lives of Jonathan Force, and they said the child Jonathan is full of wonder and conviction. As a middle-aged man, he is an expert, comfortable with success. And in old age, he finds wonder once again, but this time the wonder is accompanied by freedom. And I thought that was a lovely way, and I've seen that so much in my life. In my life now, is that I think one of the maybe the only successful thing I've done in my life is I've kept a sense of wonder. And so it's funny because I'll talk with friends and family the same age or slightly younger, maybe slightly older, that are all much more cynical than I am, much more skeptical than I am. And part of it is that I've always tried to tell everyone. One is that, and I thank my parents for this. My parents were both working. I was the old term was latchkey kid. I kind of got to school on my own, got home on my own, was on my own until they got home and made dinner, and they would go to bed, right? They were tired, they were commuting. But it gave me this wild freedom. So I always had freedom when I was a kid. I always had a lot of time to myself. And it made me very self-contained, even now, to where I'll get more frustrated if I don't have any time to myself than vice versa, right? It's like you can leave me alone for long stretches. If you're on top of me for long stretches, that's when I'll start to get frustrated because I don't have that just ability to manage, to kind of calibrate myself. So I think that that's helped me kind of through this stage kind of retain that sense of wonder. I also try to I believe in intellectual humility. Just I try to not shield myself from ideas. It's whatever the idea is, I'll kind of accept it and then think critically about it. Which is a separate thing, but I think helps me have kind of retained a sense of I don't know anything. You tell me, you the expert, I'll listen and try to to learn from it and accept some, and maybe I won't agree with some, but I'll move on. But what I loved about that quote was, and I've really seen it doing this show, because one of the real blessings of this has been that I've had so much time to spend with people. And I call it a life hack. I try to tell my kids this, and they absolutely won't listen because they're children. Is that when you talk with people that are older than you, it's like getting a glimpse of the future. Like I wish I'd learned that earlier, but it's you realize oh no, they've gone through life, and even though life has changed, people haven't that much. So you get a glimpse of it. And one of the really fun parts for me of this show has been talking with people, and I've had a lot of people that are older on, and they have that sense of wonder again. And it's really refreshing for me, because then when I talk with people like my age and a little younger, they tend to be very skeptical, and it tends to be, no, this can't be happening in the box, and that's natural. And I think you capture that in the novel. But so as you've gone, is that something you experienced in your life now that you did kind of refine that wonder as you've retired and kind of moved on to later life here? Is it something that was just more than novel based? No.
The novel was written because of what I thought was an understanding that the old age is new territory. And one of the things I think you used the term is a freedom. Another is to access what you had in the past, but with a totally different perspective. One of the things about being older, there are losses. There are losses in competence, there are losses in acuity. There are obviously physical losses, and I used to be a better golfer, but the losses in a way. Including you can't do things for as long or as much of as you did before. In a way, make room. They make room for a new kind of understanding, a new kind of appreciation. And again, I don't think wonder is a kind of a strange state of mind to try to discuss or document. I don't think I've ever experienced as much wonder as I have in the last 10 years of my life. And I'm still working in this now 5-volume exploration of later life, which you call On My Way Out. There are 4 volumes of it. That's what I do. I try to document, and it reads a little bit like a diary, but it's not a diary. It's not like whatever I did. It's whenever something occurs to me that I want to document from this late life perspective, because I think it's a perspective that's not been documented much before. Normally, old age is a period of decline, a period of less and less feeling, less intensity, and so forth. And I'm finding, at least so far, I'm 78, not at all. But a new kind of wonder, and that doesn't really depend on your past competence or your past definition. It's just this. I mean, things that are very immediate are wondrous. I have an entry in this thing, I think, from volume 1 of going to the barber, and a very, very old, frail woman. She must be, I'm sure she's in her 90s, but she's so scared. She can't weigh 70 pounds, I don't think. And her husband has taken her in to get this haircut, and she's very frail. And the barber is being very nice to the woman, trying to get and responses out of her. And the husband is encouraging her to sit still and saying to the barber how much she liked the haircut she got last time and so forth. And then I was sitting there waiting for my turn, and I realized these two, the husband and the barber, were attending to this woman who could have not lived another 10 minutes. And this incredible bond of warmth, of affection. The barber was knocking herself out to comfort and make this, and the husband is literally sort of coaching his wife through the procedure. And it was like this little, like a triad of incredibly warm souls. And I remember thinking, this is all you need. This is all anyone needs: care.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. Those people who didn't know each other were just being so wonderful. So I mean, that's the kind of thing I think. When I was 20 years old, going in for a haircut, I'd be thinking, when am I up? And I've got to get out of here pretty soon.
Figure it out.
Yeah. So I mean, that's and that's a very trivial example of what I hope I'm trying to convey.
Sure.
Also, in this, I thought I'd be writing about, as I announced I was going to do, writing about how we perceive old age and what lessons it has to tell. But because it's been going on for a long time, it's quite a document about the pandemic, and it's quite a document about the rise and I hope the decline of Trump. I mean, it's so one very kind reviewer of the last volume said, This is a modern day Pepys, Samuel Pepys, who were trying to write a diary in the 16th century of England, actually told the story of the 16th century of England. So I'm hoping there might be some of that too, like how this era that we're in actually registered to a sensitive human being, as opposed to a history book kind of account of it. So that's one of my hopes for the project.
So I think now would be a perfect time. We can do our shots portion of the show as we go, and then we can transition over to a reading from On My Way Out. So rapid fire questions. Your first thoughts on these, and we'll get going. What's the best / worst excuse a student has ever given you?
Oh, there's so many. I'm just going to have to say the one that warms my heart the most was, I'm sorry, I just couldn't do it. I'm sorry, I'm behind. I just couldn't do it. It just, those are the ones that melted me.
Right. Well, and that's kind of lovely in this way too. Like, it's just very honest. Like, and hell, who can't appreciate that? What is the coolest location you've played saloon piano at?
Oh, that's easy. There's a famous old jazz room in Chicago called the Pump Room. And, the room is filled with pictures of Frank Sinatra and all kinds of people. And one time when I was there on school business, I just wanted to go to the Pump Room just to have been in that room. And there was a piano player, and it was quite good, and I was enjoying it. And I made some requests, and the piano player said, "Oh, I see you know this repertoire." And I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Yeah, I played it." She said, "Would you like to play?" So yes, and I played a set, and it went well. And I was thinking, I'm in the Pump Room, so that was one of life's great pleasures. I've had some other pleasures like that sitting around, but Cleveland, where I worked, had a great jazz club called Nighttown, which is from James Joyce, and there were lots of great jazz acts. But because I went there a lot and I knew the people, they let me play too. So I got to play in a lot of nights at Nighttown, and which made me very proud because the other people who played were the real thing. So that was a pleasure.
Sure. Very cool. And then I got a question here that comes from Twitter. So I'll just read it. I am finally going to meet my pen pal. Oh, very, very good. What is a shiv, and how do I bake one into a cake? I'm not sure you're the right person to ask how to bake into a shiv, but do you have any for our friend on Twitter? Do you know what a shiv is?
I don't. I
think that's when they fashion down a toothbrush or something into it, like a knife or something. That's
okay, like a weapon, the shivs. Okay. All right. So, what is the question?
So the question is, what is a shiv, and how do I bake one into a cake?
Well, okay. Now that I understand, a shiv is a pointed weapon. I would have no idea how to bake it into a cake, but I would assume I would probably buy a cake because I don't bake and stick it in. hope for the best.
Yeah, maybe a little frosting on the outside, and then you cover the whole that way. Do you have a bucket list? And if so, was being on this show on it?
Well, now that I've been on the show, or practically almost done being on the show, I would have it in my metaphysical bucket list, because it's been a pleasure. But the first part, do I have a bucket list? Sort of, but mainly to do with travel. And I want to travel to Lake Como in Italy. And because of the pictures I've seen, I'm wondering whether I'll actually get down to doing it. Because the most beautiful experiences of the world I've ever had have been in that region, the Swiss and Italian Alps. So that's it. Otherwise, I think my life has been exactly as I wanted it to be.
Very good. And then very last one for our shots portion of the show here is, what's the most important thing I can teach my 12-year-old son today?
Patience. Patience and to talk less, listen more. And relatives of patience, like tolerance, and don't be quick to judge, and see how long he can suspend his judgment, positive or negative, and how much can he take in about the situation or the other person before he judges it. I think I haven't put that very well, but that's what I would hope for him.
Sure. That's beautiful. It reminds me, it's a funny story, but my son at that point he's 5 or 6. And I forget what it's about, but he tells my wife, tells his mom, you know what? You're not giving me the opportunity to learn patience. We tell him that till this day. If he has to wait or something, like, this is your opportunity to learn patience, and he hates us bringing that up. Maybe then we could transition over and get a reading. I think you're going to read from On My Way Out. Sure.
And Bill, tell me if this is all right. On My Way Out, it expresses it's in the voice and my voice of somebody who's at my time of life, and it's a summation. It's somebody who's been through experiences and is trying to interpret and sum it up. But I'd like to contrast that, if I could, with something I wrote much earlier when I was writing poems about a time when I had no perspective at all, and what happened was it was an evolving wonder, and that, I think that's a very good perspective from which to write poems. But I wrote one that I'm still fond of because of the event it recounts, and I'd like to contrast that, if I could, then to the sort of a summary piece from On My Way Out. Is that all right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. That'd be lovely.
I will start with a poem. Overcome with Prayer at Childbirth. I had never heard such wails, such simply enormous sound from a wife. Clear now is the whole business of Jericho and the walls. Those yellow walls, that whole yellow hospital shook with each sharp flashbulb scream. Somewhere in her scarlet pain, in her earth's core, spoke this power, this terror. This was the beginning. For delivery, of course, decorated with the surgical trappings of husbands, I was to stand peripheral, politely dressed for science. But science, for all its gauze and steamy light, only watched, witnessing my animal wife in her work. At first, as always, all not well. The car's rear end in a ditch and too few men to push. The piano up the narrow stairs, the icebox through the doorway. At exhaustion, the sheer event took over. Eyes widen, earthquake. We are up over Niagara, blood like thunder in our throats. In silence, you came gliding. The head, the whole package. Perfect purple Buddha from your organ cave. Stately liner nosing into a still small pond. Your mother and I, wafer weak, could only behold your creation. And then, from a different point of view and a different time of life, this entry from Volume 4 of On My Way Out, it's dated. It's September 8th, 2020. The pandemic has just begun. The ship of state wobbles and sputters as Western forests burn. Already masked citizens breathe toxic air. Millions remain without work and without means. Schools at every level are attempting to offer instruction on campus, online, and every imaginable combination of those approaches, while the health consequences for teachers and students alike are already ominous. Yet, day after cloudless day, Vermont insists on being otherwise. I have never awakened to a more sustained series of bright, bracing days, temperatures rising to the mid-70s at midday, gardens and wildflowers in spectacular bloom. There is a heightened cheerfulness and civility in the post office, in the supermarket aisles, and in the Ripton country store, which is our next door neighbor. In a sense, we all dwell in concentric rings, the innermost ring being our residence, if we have a residence. As I have probably already related at excessive length, I am beyond besotted with mine. An old, slightly rambling frame house chock full of comforts, visual surprises, books, music, foodstuffs, beverages, condiments. Outside, blazing gardens, ample firewood, a pleasing expanse of greensward giving way to the shushing, gurgling river, beyond which rises a dense forest. 2 serviceable cars stand at the ready, just steps outside our door. The gabled roofline of my wife's gallery and studio appears above the roof of the garage to suggest, at least to me, that we are rather a little village unto ourselves. But that little village is contained within the actual little village of Ripton, Vermont, the several hundred residents of which, many of whom I now know, are a civic dream of generosity and thoughtfulness. The next outward ring is Vermont, which I want to think of as its own sturdy republic. By any Vermont standards, I am an outsider, a flatlander implant. To whatever degree I am accepted or even tolerated, my gratitude knows no bounds. Yesterday morning, my wife asked me what I wanted to do with my remains. Has she sensed something? And though I had not thought much about it, I answered without pause, I want my ashes scattered over the river behind the house, with a few sprinkled along the walkway in front of Middlebury College's Mead Chapel, to my mind, the epicenter of the college, which was so formative for me, and which I love like a person. The final outward ring would be the nation, but it has ceased to feel like an enclosure containing me. It is frayed and porous at the margins, sustaining qualities leaking out, sinister qualities seeping in. I do not expect anything like a restoration of my boyhood sense of being held fast in a mighty national enterprise driven by humane goodwill. But I would like to see a regime change that sets the country on a course that is to some degree continuous with the American trajectory established after the Allied victory in World War II. Settled in as I am in Ripton, do I have any business raising complaints? For the moment, I am anti-Job. Yet the mounting revelation that we have barely begun to come to terms with the necessity of racial equality and what that entails for the administration of justice, that the monstrous daily reality that we are notionally led by the likes of Donald Trump, and that the legislation arm of government cannot find a way to treat the sick, feed the hungry, or educate youth to the limits of their potential, because that would be socialism, renders me querulous, sometimes as sleepless as Job. A man without a polis is either a pig or a god, Aristotle wrote in his book, The Politics. Not being a god and not wanting to be a pig, I'm crying out for a polis. I think we all are. I wish it were not a guilty admission that the past 15 years, rustication in Vermont had been, for me, the most deeply satisfying and happiest years of my life.
Thank you for that. I think that's a lovely way to end our conversation here. So I like to say on all the shows, that's last call, because, I have a bar behind me and it's bar themed, and you don't have to go home, but you'll have to restart the video. The very last question I like to ask everyone, and it's one I always take to heart here, is if you were to give any advice to the folks that end up tuning into the show here, what's one piece of advice you'd give them that could just make their day, their life just a little bit better?
Listen more. talk less.
That's beautiful. I'm gonna try that for the next episode of this.
It always doesn't work for me, but it's a shining goal.
Sure, that's lovely. And if people do want to learn more about you and your work, where's the best place they should go?
Probably, or you could Google me. I'm not that prominent, but that all the stuff comes up. But I have a website, richardallenhawley.com. But you can all just put it into Google, Richard Hawley's website, and it will come up. And it lists all the books and the biographical background and anything else probably anyone would want to know is there, including contact information. But it is over time, I've written quite a lot of books, and and they're all listed and they're briefly described, and that's probably the best place to go.
Okay, awesome. And I'll include it on the show notes here. So if you're on YouTube or on my website, wherever you're getting the show, it'll be readily available for you to click on. So thank you again so much for coming on. It's been a real honor to spend some time with you. And I know I'm always better for all these shows. I always feel like I'm a better person for having gotten to spend time with the guest, and this is definitely no exception. So thank you for that, and I hope you continue to go on. When I saw that On My Way Out was on the 5th and then going on a 6th, it reminded me of my wife being annoyed with me when we're leaving a party. And I'm like, we're on our way out. And then it just takes me a long time. So I hope there's a 7th and an 8th and a 9th. The volumes keep going.
Yeah. I'm worried, having written so many of these volumes, that even my close friends are saying, well, can you get on with it? Anyways, I'm going to stay true to my mission and document what comes up. But Bill, it's been a pleasure. It's been fun to talk.